You think military mess halls only served bland, forgettable slop that soldiers choked down out of necessity? Think again. From World War I trenches to Cold War bases, military cooks created dishes born of resourcefulness, rationing, and the urgent need to fuel fighting men. Let's dig into 30 military mess hall recipes they'll never serve again. Navy bean soup with salt pork was the backbone of military nutrition for generations, a dish that simmered in massive kettles across Army and Navy mess halls from the Civil War through Vietnam. Cooks would start the night before, soaking pounds of dried Navy beans in cold water, then draining them at dawn to begin the slow simmer with chunks of salt pork that rendered fat and flavor into the broth. The beans cooked for hours, breaking down into a thick, creamy soup that stuck to ribs and provided the protein and carbohydrates fighting men needed. Salt pork was cheap and shelf-stable, making it ideal for military supply chains that stretched across continents. The soup required no refrigeration, just time and heat. Mess hall cooks learned to judge doneness by texture alone, knowing when the beans had reached that perfect point between whole and mush. Served with hardtack or bread, this soup could fuel a soldier through a 12-hour shift. Creamed peas on toast became one of the military's most reliable vegetable dishes, turning canned peas into something that soldiers actually looked forward to eating. Mess hall cooks would open industrial-sized cans of peas, drain them, then fold them into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and powdered milk reconstituted with water. The sauce was seasoned simply with salt and pepper, sometimes a dash of onion powder when available. This creamy mixture was ladled generously over slices of toast that had been prepared on massive flat-top griddles capable of toasting hundreds of pieces per hour. The toast soaked up the sauce while maintaining enough structure to be eaten with a fork. Soldiers nicknamed it various unprintable terms, but they ate it because it was warm, filling, and provided vitamins that prevented deficiency diseases in men living on preserved rations. The dish represented military cooking at its most practical, transforming shelf-stable ingredients into complete meals. Mess hall corned beef hash was a morning staple that turned yesterday's meat into today's breakfast across military installations worldwide. Cooks would chop leftover corned beef into small cubes, mix it with diced potatoes and onions, then spread the mixture across hot griddles where it sizzled and crisped into golden brown patties. The key was pressing the hash flat and letting it develop a crust before flipping, creating texture that distinguished mess hall hash from the soggy canned versions. During wartime rationing, cooks stretched the meat by increasing the potato ratio, ensuring every soldier got a full portion even when supplies ran low. The hash was served with eggs when available, though powdered eggs were more common than fresh in most theaters of operation. Men who had grown up on their mother's Sunday hash found comfort in this familiar dish, even when eating it thousands of miles from home. The aroma of frying onions and crisping potatoes filled mess halls before dawn. Powdered egg scramble was the breakfast that kept millions of soldiers fed during World War II, when fresh eggs were impossible to supply across global battlefields. The eggs arrived in large cans as a yellow powder that cooks reconstituted with water, creating a mixture that could be scrambled in enormous batches on flat-top griddles. The texture was different from fresh eggs, slightly rubbery with a faintly metallic aftertaste that soldiers learned to mask with liberal applications of salt and pepper. Mess hall cooks developed techniques for improving the scramble, adding small amounts of canned milk or cheese when available, folding in bits of bacon or ham to provide distraction from the artificial texture. What the eggs lacked in taste they made up for in nutrition and convenience, providing complete protein to men who burned thousands of calories daily in combat and labor. The scramble became a symbol of wartime sacrifice, something soldiers ate knowing fresh eggs awaited them back home. Military bread pudding transformed stale bread and leftover ingredients into a dessert that soldiers actually requested, proving that mess hall cooks understood comfort as well as nutrition. Day-old bread that would otherwise be discarded was torn into chunks soaked in a mixture of reconstituted powdered milk, sugar, eggs, and vanilla extract, then baked until the custard set and the top turned golden brown. Some cooks added raisins or canned fruit when supplies permitted, creating variations that gave soldiers something to anticipate. The pudding was served warm with a simple sauce made from butter and sugar, providing sweetness in an environment where comfort food held tremendous psychological value. Men far from home, facing danger and uncertainty, found genuine solace in warm bread pudding that reminded them of civilian kitchens and peacetime abundance. The dish required no special equipment, just standard mess hall ovens, making it practical for installations. Hardtack and coffee represented the most basic military sustenance, a combination that sustained armies from the Civil War through World War I and remained in emergency rations long after. Hardtack was a thick cracker made from flour, water, and salt, baked until completely dry to prevent spoilage during long campaigns. The resulting crackers were so hard they could break teeth if bitten directly, earning nicknames like sheet iron and worm castles, the latter referring to the weevil larvae that sometimes infested stored hardtack. Soldiers learned to soften the crackers by dunking them in coffee, crumbling them into soup, or frying them in bacon grease. The coffee itself was often made from roasted grain substitutes when actual coffee was unavailable, creating a bitter brew that soldiers drank more for warmth and ritual than flavor. Together, hardtack and coffee provided calories and comfort in the most austere conditions, a meal that required nothing but boiling water and could be prepared anywhere. C-ration beef stew was the canned meal that fed American soldiers through World War II and Korea, a self-contained dinner that required no cooking and could be eaten directly from the can if necessary. The stew contained chunks of beef, potatoes, carrots, and peas suspended in thick gravy, all pressure-cooked and sealed in heavy tin cans designed to survive rough handling and extreme temperatures. Soldiers heated their C-rations over small fires, on vehicle engines, or with the heat tablets included in each meal packet. The taste was acceptable rather than delicious, with the canning process softening vegetables and giving the meat a distinctive processed flavor. What the stew provided was reliability and nutrition, delivering protein and calories in a format that worked equally well in Pacific jungles and European winters. Each can was a complete meal, eliminating the need for mess hall infrastructure in forward positions. Boiled beef and vegetables was the mess hall dinner that appeared on military tables worldwide, a straightforward preparation that transformed tough cuts into tender meals. Large pieces of beef, usually shoulder or chuck, were simmered for hours in enormous kettles with carrots, potatoes, turnips, and onions until the meat could be cut with a fork. The long cooking time broke down connective tissue, turning inexpensive cuts into something approaching tenderness. The cooking liquid became a rich broth that was served alongside the meat and vegetables, providing additional nutrition and flavor. Mess hall cooks learned to judge doneness by the way meat pulled apart, knowing that undercooking meant tough, chewy servings that soldiers would complain about. The dish required minimal skill but maximum patience, perfect for military kitchens that operated on predictable schedules. Boiled beef appeared on mess hall menus from the Revolutionary War through Vietnam, a constant in otherwise changing military diets. Reconstituted potato mash was the side dish that accompanied nearly every mess hall dinner, created from dehydrated potato flakes that could be stored indefinitely and prepared in minutes. Cooks added hot water and powdered milk to the flakes, stirring until the mixture reached the proper consistency, then seasoned with salt, pepper, and whatever butter or margarine was available. The texture was different from fresh mashed potatoes, slightly gummy and lacking the distinct potato flavor that came from actual tubers. But the convenience was undeniable, allowing mess halls to serve hundreds of portions without the labor of peeling, boiling, and mashing fresh potatoes. Soldiers who missed their mother's homemade mashed potatoes learned to accept this substitute, covering it with gravy to mask the artificial texture. The dehydrated potatoes traveled well, resisted spoilage, and provided carbohydrates that kept men energized through physical labor. Vienna sausage and beans combined two shelf-stable proteins into a dish that appeared regularly on mess hall tables during both world wars. The small, soft sausages were added to pots of simmering beans, their mild flavor and tender texture blending with the earthy legumes. Cooks seasoned the mixture with onion, tomato, and whatever spices the supply chain provided, creating a one-pot meal that was filling and nutritious. The sausages came packed in small tins that opened easily and required no refrigeration, making them ideal for military logistics. The beans provided fiber and protein, while the sausages added fat and salt. Together, they created a meal that stuck to ribs and provided sustained energy for physical labor and combat. The dish was humble but effective, representing the military's approach to feeding large numbers of people with limited resources and challenging supply conditions. D-ration emergency chocolate was designed to taste just bad enough that soldiers would only eat it when truly desperate, a deliberate choice by military planners who worried men would consume their emergency rations as snacks. The bars were made from chocolate, sugar, cocoa butter, oat flour, and vitamin fortification, compressed into dense blocks that could survive desert heat without melting. The texture was waxy and the flavor bitter, nothing like the Hershey bars soldiers remembered from home. Each 4-ounce bar provided 600 calories, enough to sustain a man through a day of survival if necessary. The chocolate was designed to be eaten in small pieces over time, providing steady energy rather than quick sugar rushes. Soldiers carried these emergency rations in their packs across every theater of World War II, knowing they represented the last line between hunger and starvation. The bars were nearly impossible to bite through, requiring soldiers to shave off pieces with their knives. Mess hall oatmeal with stewed prunes was the breakfast combination that military cooks served to keep digestive systems functioning in men whose diets otherwise consisted heavily of preserved meats and starches. The oatmeal was prepared in enormous vats, cooked until thick and creamy, then portioned into metal trays alongside stewed prunes that had been simmered in sweetened water until soft. The prunes provided fiber and natural laxative effects that prevented the constipation common among soldiers eating field rations. Many men hated the prunes but ate them anyway, understanding the practical necessity even if they complained about the taste. The oatmeal itself was filling and warm, providing sustained energy through long morning hours of training or labor. Mess hall cooks added brown sugar, butter, and sometimes cinnamon when supplies permitted, transforming basic oats into something approaching comfort food. The combination appeared on breakfast tables from training camps to overseas bases, a constant in military dining. Canned sardine sandwiches were a protein-rich meal that required no cooking and could be assembled anywhere soldiers found themselves, making them invaluable during movements when mess hall facilities were unavailable. The sardines came packed in oil or tomato sauce, small tins that opened with keys and released the distinctive smell of preserved fish that some soldiers loved and others found unbearable. The fish were mashed onto bread with whatever condiments were available, usually mustard or mayonnaise, creating sandwiches that provided omega fatty acids and calcium from the soft, edible bones. Sardines traveled well, lasted indefinitely when sealed, and provided complete nutrition in a compact package. Soldiers who grew up near coastal areas often appreciated the familiar taste, while inland men needed time to develop tolerance for the strong flavor. The sandwiches were practical rather than delicious, a compromise between nutrition and logistics that defined military food philosophy. Creamed corn on biscuits was a mess hall combination that turned two pantry staples into a filling meal capable of satisfying hungry soldiers when protein supplies ran low. The creamed corn came from massive institutional cans, already prepared with a thick sauce that needed only heating before serving. Biscuits were made fresh in mess hall ovens or reconstituted from prepared mixes, their flaky texture providing the perfect base for the sweet, creamy corn. The dish was comfort food in its purest form, reminding men of Southern home cooking and family suppers. Mess hall cooks sometimes added bits of bacon or ham when available, elevating the simple combination into something soldiers genuinely looked forward to eating. The corn provided carbohydrates and fiber, while the biscuits delivered the satisfying density that kept men full through hours of physical labor. This combination appeared frequently on mess hall menus because the ingredients were cheap, shelf-stable, and universally available. Mess hall goulash was the military's answer to stretching limited meat supplies while creating something that resembled home cooking. A thick stew of ground beef, tomatoes, macaroni, and whatever vegetables the supply chain provided. Cooks browned enormous quantities of ground beef in massive kettles, added canned tomatoes and tomato paste, then simmered the mixture with onions, peppers, and seasonings until the flavors melded together. Elbow macaroni was cooked separately and added at the end, absorbing the rich tomato sauce and creating a one-dish meal that satisfied both hunger and cravings for something familiar. The goulash bore little resemblance to authentic Hungarian cuisine, but soldiers didn't care about authenticity. They cared about taste and substance. The dish could be made in enormous batches, served easily, and reheated the next day when flavors had deepened further. Goulash appeared regularly on mess hall menus throughout the 20th century, a military tradition. Powdered milk pudding was the mess hall dessert that proved military cooks could create sweetness from the most basic shelf-stable ingredients available. Reconstituted powdered milk was mixed with cornstarch, sugar, and vanilla extract, then cooked slowly until the mixture thickened into a creamy pudding that could be served warm or chilled. The texture was different from puddings made with fresh milk, slightly grainier with a faint powdered milk aftertaste that soldiers learned to overlook. Mess hall cooks added cocoa powder for chocolate variations or layered the pudding with crushed cookies or cake crumbs to create parfaits that felt special. The dessert provided calcium and comfort, important psychological nourishment for men far from home who missed civilian pleasures. Pudding required no special equipment and could be made in large batches, making it practical for military kitchens. The simple sweetness reminded soldiers that even in austere conditions, small pleasures remained possible. Navy figgy duff was a traditional steamed pudding that British naval traditions brought into American mess halls, a dense, sweet dessert that sustained sailors through long voyages and cold watches. The pudding combined flour, sweet or shortening, dried figs, raisins, brown sugar, and spices into a thick batter that was wrapped in cloth and steamed for hours until firm and moist. The result was dense and richly flavored, each slice revealing pockets of fruit suspended in the sweet dough. Figgy duff was served with hard sauce made from butter, sugar, and sometimes rum flavoring, creating a dessert that felt celebratory even in the most austere circumstances. The steaming process required only boiling water and patience, making the pudding practical for ships at sea where oven space was limited. Sailors looked forward to figgy duff on Sundays and holidays, a tradition that connected them to naval heritage stretching back centuries. Salmon croquettes were the mess hall's way of transforming canned salmon into something that felt like real cooking, hand-formed patties that were breaded and fried until golden brown and crispy. Cooks mixed canned salmon with mashed potatoes, eggs, and seasonings, shaped the mixture into oval patties, rolled them in breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs, then fried them in hot oil until the exterior turned crunchy while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. The croquettes were served with white sauce or tartar sauce, providing protein and satisfying texture in a format that felt more refined than simply serving fish from a can. The dish stretched canned salmon further than plain servings would allow, feeding more soldiers from each tin. Men who grew up in households where croquettes appeared regularly found comfort in the familiar preparation, while others discovered a new appreciation for canned fish transformed through technique. The aroma of frying croquettes filled mess halls with promising smells. Bouillon and hardtack was the emergency meal that sustained soldiers when nothing else was available. A thin broth made from concentrated cubes dissolved in hot water and served alongside the military's infamous dry crackers. The bouillon cubes were compact, lightweight, and nearly indestructible, providing sodium and flavor that made hot water feel like actual food. Soldiers would crumble their hardtack into the broth, softening the tooth-breaking crackers enough to eat while adding substance to the thin liquid. The combination provided warmth and minimal calories during the worst circumstances, when supply lines failed or combat made cooking impossible. The bouillon's salty, meaty flavor masked the stale taste of hardtack that might have been packed months or years before. This was survival food at its most basic, requiring nothing but water and fire, keeping men alive until proper meals could resume. The combination represented military resourcefulness. canned fruit cocktail on pound cake was the mess hall dessert that felt luxurious despite requiring no actual cooking or preparation beyond opening cans and slicing cake. The fruit cocktail contained diced peaches, pears, grapes, pineapple, and maraschino cherries suspended in sweet syrup, a colorful combination that reminded soldiers of peacetime abundance. The pound cake came pre-made from military bakeries or was prepared from mixes in mess hall ovens, its dense, buttery texture providing the perfect base for the syrupy fruit. Served together, the combination offered sweetness, variety, and the satisfying experience of eating something that felt like celebration. Soldiers looked forward to this dessert, knowing its appearance meant someone had put thought into making their meal special. The canned fruit lasted indefinitely, traveled well, and provided vitamins that preserved rations otherwise lacked. This simple dessert proved that military food could sometimes transcend mere sustenance. Dehydrated vegetable soup was the military's solution to providing hot, nutritious meals in locations where fresh produce could never survive the journey. The soup arrived as compressed blocks or loose flakes of dried carrots, peas, onions, celery, and potatoes that could be stored for years without refrigeration. Cooks dropped these dehydrated vegetables into boiling water, watching them slowly rehydrate and release flavor into a broth that was thin but surprisingly tasty. Bouillon cubes or meat extracts were added to provide depth, transforming reconstituted vegetables into something resembling homemade soup. The convenience was remarkable, allowing mess halls and remote outposts to serve vegetable soup without fresh ingredients. Soldiers appreciated the warmth and familiar taste of vegetables, even if texture never matched fresh produce. The soup provided vitamins and minerals that preserved meat rations lacked, helping prevent deficiency diseases in men living on limited diets. Cornmeal mush with molasses was the breakfast that connected military mess halls to centuries of American frontier cooking, a simple combination that provided energy and warmth with minimal ingredients. Cooks prepared the mush by slowly stirring cornmeal into boiling water, cooking it until the mixture thickened into a smooth porridge that could be served immediately or poured into pans to set for later frying. The molasses was drizzled over the hot mush, its dark sweetness contrasting with the bland corn flavor and providing quick energy from its sugar content. This breakfast required only cornmeal, water, and sweetener, making it practical for military supply chains that struggled to deliver perishables. Soldiers from rural backgrounds recognized the dish from their childhoods, while city men learned to appreciate its filling warmth. The mush stuck to ribs and provided sustained energy through morning drills, proving that military food didn't need complexity to be effective. Creamed chipped turkey was the military's answer to creamed chipped beef when beef supplies ran short, substituting dried turkey into the same white sauce preparation that soldiers either loved or despised. The turkey was dried, salted, and sliced thin, then rehydrated in a cream sauce made from butter, flour, and milk before being served over toast or biscuits. The flavor was milder than beef, with a slightly gamey quality that some soldiers preferred. Mess hall cooks prepared enormous batches, the white sauce bubbling in massive pots while toast was prepared by the hundreds. The dish provided protein and fat in a format that was quick to prepare and easy to serve, important qualities when feeding hundreds of hungry men on tight schedules. Turkey was sometimes more available than beef, depending on supply contracts and seasonal factors, making this variation a practical alternative. The creamed preparation disguised the sometimes tough texture of dried meat. Rice pudding with raisins was the mess hall dessert that turned leftover rice into something soldiers genuinely enjoyed, a creamy, sweet treat that provided comfort and calories in equal measure. Cooks combined cooked rice with milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, then baked the mixture until it set into a custard studded with plump raisins that had softened during cooking. The pudding could be served warm from the oven or chilled for later, making it versatile for mess hall schedules. Cinnamon and nutmeg were added when available, their warm spices elevating the simple dessert into something that felt almost homemade. The dish represented the military's commitment to using every ingredient efficiently, transforming rice that might otherwise be discarded into a popular dessert. Soldiers who had grown up eating their mother's rice pudding found genuine comfort in this familiar preparation. The pudding was filling enough to serve as a substantial addition to meals. Corned beef and cabbage was the mess hall dinner that appeared regularly on military tables, especially in installations with Irish-American cooks who brought their cultural traditions into institutional kitchens. The corned beef was simmered for hours until fork tender, its salty, spiced flavor permeating the cooking liquid. Cabbage wedges were added during the final hour, cooking until soft and infused with the meat's essence. Potatoes and carrots often joined the pot, creating a complete one-pot meal that required minimal oversight once cooking began. The dish was economical because corned beef was preserved meat that traveled well and lasted indefinitely, while cabbage was cheap and abundant. Soldiers appreciated the hearty portions and familiar flavors, especially those who had grown up in Irish or Eastern European households where similar preparations appeared regularly. The aroma of cooking corned beef filled mess halls, announcing dinner long before serving lines opened. Bug juice was the military's infamous powdered drink mix that turned water into something vaguely fruit-flavored, a beverage that soldiers consumed more for hydration than enjoyment. The powder came in industrial-sized containers, mixed with water in massive dispensers that sat on mess hall serving lines. The flavor was aggressively sweet and artificial, bearing only passing resemblance to actual fruit juice. Colors ranged from electric red to neon green, depending on the supposed flavor, though soldiers often claimed they all tasted identical. The drink provided sugar and hydration, important in hot climates where men sweated through their uniforms during training and combat. Some soldiers grew to appreciate bug juice, while others avoided it entirely, preferring water or coffee instead. The nickname reflected soldiers' dark humor about military food quality, though the drink served its practical purpose effectively. Stewed tomatoes on toast was the mess hall combination that divided soldiers into passionate camps. Those who loved the sweet acidity of warm tomatoes on crispy bread, and those who found the soggy result genuinely offensive. Canned stewed tomatoes were heated and ladled over toast, creating a simple dish that provided vitamins, carbohydrates, and a taste of vegetables when fresh produce was unavailable. The tomatoes broke down during heating, their juices soaking into the bread and creating a texture that was either comforting or unappetizing depending on the eater. Some cooks added sugar to balance the acidity, while others kept the preparation simple. The dish appeared regularly on mess hall breakfast and lunch menus because the ingredients were cheap and shelf-stable. Soldiers from southern and rural backgrounds often recognized the preparation from home cooking, while others encountered it for the first time in military service. Coffee soup was the desperate breakfast improvisation that soldiers created when nothing else was available, a combination of hot coffee, crumbled bread or hardtack, and whatever sugar could be scrounged. The bread absorbed the coffee, softening into a porridge-like consistency that was filling if not exactly delicious. This wasn't an official mess hall preparation, but rather a field expedient that soldiers developed independently across multiple conflicts. The coffee provided warmth and caffeine while the bread added substance, creating a meal of sorts from ingredients that were almost always available. Some soldiers added condensed milk or canned cream when they could find it, improving the flavor considerably. Coffee soup represented the resourcefulness born from necessity, the willingness to create sustenance from whatever was at hand. Veterans often remembered this improvised meal with a mixture of disgust and nostalgia, a reminder of harder times. Canned pork and beans was the military staple that appeared in mess halls and field rations across every American conflict of the 20th century, a complete meal in a can that required no preparation beyond heating. The beans were navy or pinto varieties, slow-cooked with tomato sauce, molasses, and small chunks of salt pork that provided richness and protein. The cans were designed for rough handling and extreme temperatures, their contents remaining edible years after packing. Soldiers heated them over fires, on vehicle engines, or ate them cold when circumstances demanded. The flavor was familiar to most Americans, similar to commercial brands they had eaten as civilians, providing psychological comfort alongside nutrition. The beans provided fiber and protein, while the tomato sauce added vitamins and flavor. This humble canned meal represented everything practical about military food, nutrition, and convenience prioritized over culinary ambition. Trench cake was the dense, spiced cake that British and American soldiers baked in field conditions during World War I, a remarkably durable dessert that could survive weeks of transport and storage. The recipe used minimal eggs and no fresh milk, relying instead on vinegar, baking soda, and golden syrup to create lift and moisture. Dried fruits, spices, and sometimes cocoa were added for flavor, producing a dark, heavy cake that sliced cleanly and kept without refrigeration. Families back home baked trench cakes and shipped them overseas, where soldiers received them as treasured reminders of civilian life. Mess hall cooks also prepared versions using military supplies, understanding that even simple sweets boosted morale. The cake was designed for survival rather than delicacy, its density and low moisture content preventing spoilage during long journeys. Soldiers shared slices with their units, the cake becoming a symbol of home and hope. C-ration chocolate discs were not dessert. They were punishment with a calorie count. Officially known as D-ration bars, these dense chocolate bricks were issued to soldiers as high-energy emergency rations. But they were no Hershey's. Made with cocoa, sugar, and oat flour to slow consumption, they were intentionally hard to chew, bitter in taste, and more useful as paperweights than snacks. Sometimes the bar came melted and fused to its waxy wrapper. Other times it was so hard you needed a knife to get through it. Troops learned to shave bits into boiling coffee to make it drinkable or gnaw on chunks like bitter jerky. Still, it was chocolate, or at least something close. When you were cold, tired, and dazed from anything resembling real food, that ugly brown bar suddenly became treasure. Some men hoarded them. Others traded them. A few even claimed to like them, though that was rare. The sugar helped boost energy during long marches, and psychologically, it reminded you of better things. Candy bars back home, ice cream, civility. In the mud and the fear, that hard, chalky disc was a strange comfort. Today, soldiers have energy gels and protein bars with flavors like mocha latte or peanut butter crunch, but nothing feels as raw or as real as the D-bar. It was bitter, it was weird, and it was unforgettable. Spam and potatoes in mess kits was a meal born out of necessity, but remembered like a strange comfort. Soldiers learned to slice up their government-issued spam, toss it into a mess tin, and mash in the powdered potato mix with hot water. It was salty, greasy, and weirdly satisfying, especially after days on the move. The pink gelatinous meat would fry up with crispy edges if you had time and a flame, and the potatoes, well, they were better than nothing. It was not gourmet, but it was hot, and it tasted like someone tried. In the cold, in the rain, after a long march, soldiers would crowd around a small fire, spoons clanking in aluminum pans, steam rising like a promise. It was a small moment of warmth in a cold, mechanical war. Today, that smell of fried spam and starchy potatoes could transport a veteran right back to the battlefield, to a place where comfort was rare and food was survival. We do not make spam and potatoes in mess kits anymore. But back then, it was enough. It had to be. For many, it was the first hot bite in days, and sometimes the last before the fighting resumed. It filled your gut, slowed your hands, reminded you for just a minute what home might have felt like. Creamed chipped beef on toast, often referred to as SOS, was a popular military meal that made its way into civilian kitchens. Now, this one was equal parts comforting and questionable. Think of it as dried beef, reconstituted into a creamy, salty sauce, and then plopped on top of toast. It's like someone tried to make a fancy grilled cheese, but accidentally ended up in the weird food hall of fame. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's definitely a unique flavor profile. It was also known as fizzled beef and was served as breakfast in many diners across the US during the post-war days. And it wasn't just limited to toast. Chipped beef was also often served on bagels, English muffins, biscuits, home fries, rice, mashed potato, and in casserole. Some people even tried flavoring it with Worcestershire sauce. Yeah, now we're talking. This one's faded from our dinner tables but hasn't been able to escape our memories just yet. Army goulash with egg noodles was one of those meals that sounded better than it looked. Picture a big vat of elbow macaroni or egg noodles swimming in a reddish gravy. usually made from tomato powder, water, and bits of mystery meat that claimed to be beef. It was all tossed together in field kitchens or makeshift mess halls and dished out with a big metal spoon onto dented trays. It wasn't Hungarian by any stretch, but the name goulash gave it a certain flair, maybe enough to distract from the fact that it was mostly starch and salt. Still, after a day of marching or digging foxholes, soldiers didn't ask too many questions. The noodles filled your gut, the tomato sauce was warm, and the meat, well, the meat was there. Barely. Sometimes they'd get lucky and find a chunk that still had some chew. Other times, it was more like a meat-flavored suggestion. But it was easy to make in massive quantities, quick to serve, and didn't spoil fast. Add a stale cracker or two and maybe a swipe of peanut butter, and you had yourself a wartime feast, kind of. You could say the same for lots of things that were made popular during the war, for example, dried noodles. This was a staple that worked really well in many different places thanks to the really long lifespan of dried noodles. They're also just as easy to store as bouillon cubes and pretty cost-efficient if you think about it. All it took to gather the ingredients to make stuff like this from scratch was a few cents. It helped people restore a sense of normalcy if you ask lots of food analysts and historians. People always were used to eating spaghetti and meatballs, noodles and pastas, dishes like that since they were teenagers. It helped people relive some of the days they were used to before the constant war efforts took over the scope of their everyday lives. Plus, people often used bouillon cubes along with their dried noodles. It was things like that, which when people put together one by one, eventually started to look like something resembling a real plate of food, and that meant a lot at the time. If people can make an entire fake fish fillet and still be pretty satisfied with it, then other meaty wonders like liver definitely are not too far off the horizon, and chopped liver substitute would eventually prove that right. Something that became incredibly popular in the war-torn landscape of America because all it took was some onions, green lentils, walnuts, and salt and pepper. You had to make a paste out of it to get the texture of chopped liver down, and in terms of taste, this was a completely new experience, yet a significantly cheaper and easier one. It was much easier to get ingredients like these than good quality liver back then, and a lot of citizens stuck with this recipe even after the dust settled because they liked how healthy of an alternative it was. So jellied consomme is a clear soup set in gelatin. It is made from richly flavored stock or broth that has been clarified, which is a process that uses egg whites to remove fat. So not only does it taste good, but it's healthy too. It's like someone decided to turn soup into a science experiment. This strange soup originated in the UK and has many variations, including double consomme, which is basically the same recipe with twice the amount of meat used. This dish was all the rage back in the day, probably because people thought it looked fancy. But let's be real, it's more like a horror movie prop than a food. Can you imagine slurping up that wobbly, gelatinous broth? I'm not sure my stomach could handle it. And that's probably the reason why we don't see this one on our dinner tables anymore. So we're going to start off with ration chocolate, which, when imagined, was rooted entirely in the need for something like that thanks to the war. Especially during the second one, though it was developed all the way back in the First World War. You could probably call this kind of thing the first kind of protein bar, since it was exactly like that for soldiers. They needed some way to get transportable, high-energy, high-protein nutrition that was fast and easy to eat. Plus, it needed to be easy to store and something that could deal with the fact that conditions weren't going to be ideal for a while. Actually, one of the most famous bars was made by the Hershey Company exclusively for use in wartime by soldiers. It was known as the D-ration bar, and it was created with around 600 calories. This thing wasn't like your average chocolate bar at all. While the typical Dairy Milk or Kit Kat might start melting around a toasty 40 degrees Fahrenheit, this bar could withstand all kinds of extreme temperatures. Other rations were also developed, like the C-ration. All of this wartime food was a way for soldiers to live on the battlefield properly and last. But it was also something the government gave away to the masses when they were struggling with the effects of the war. Despite how hard it was to get normal chocolate, it wasn't that uncommon to see people with ration chocolate in their homes, though it didn't taste as good either. Pork loaf in gelatin was one of the most polarizing canned meals ever issued to troops. It came in a tin, just like Spam. But that's where the resemblance ended. This was a smooth, rectangular slab of finely ground pork suspended in a pale, wobbly gelatin. It didn't smell bad exactly, but it didn't smell like food either. Some soldiers chilled it and sliced it like cold cuts, spreading it on crackers. Others heated it over a small flame, hoping the gelatin would melt into a kind of gravy. Spoiler, it didn't. The texture was dense, almost rubbery, and the flavor walked the line between salty and strangely sweet. The label said fully cooked, but that didn't mean appetizing. Still, it was protein and it kept you going. In fact, it kept you going for days. Most guys choked it down with black coffee or buried it under hot sauce. But there were always a few weirdos who loved it as is and hoarded their extra cans. Either way, it stuck in your memory, whether you liked it or not. So, for onions stuffed with grape nuts, you needed nothing that fancy, not even a lot of seasoning outside of your basic salt and pepper. All you needed was 1.5 cups of pork sausage meat, some melted fat, ketchup, and if you could spare some strips, then bacon. Of course, the key player, grape nuts, would come later when the onions would be chopped and diced mixed with the sausage and the other ingredients. This was then baked for around 40 minutes, and the outcome was a resounding yes from everyone at the dinner table. Dishes that were simple but incredibly effective at filling everyone and leaving them with a happy smile were the holy grail of the 40s and 50s. If you're a fan of pineapple on pizza, you would have loved this next one. Pineapple and cheese salad was a unique delight back in the day. This dish came into existence when someone decided to mix pineapple and cheese together in times of misery. Imagine cubes of pineapple in a creamy cheese mixture, terrifying or finger-licking delicious? There's no in-between. This was a variation of the infamous candle salad, which was a vintage fruit salad popular in America in the 1920s and was typically composed of lettuce, pineapple, banana, cherry, and either mayonnaise or cottage cheese. This was considered a luxurious delicacy during the tough times of the war, but just fails to meet the standards now. It's still a great way to use up leftover pineapple from your holiday punch if you're ever feeling adventurous. Thanks to the massive shortages of food that happened during World War II, it became a pretty normal fact of life for people to constantly live off of dehydrated vegetables. I can't begin to overstate how starved people were of basic everyday goods they used to always have the money for and, moreover, were always available in stores. The lack of both of these basic assurances of your day meant that a lot of people's daily script from 8 to 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. was completely flipped on its head. Suddenly, the question of, how am I going to feed my family, became very real. Unfortunately, while questions like that were easy to ask yourself, it was hard to come up with an answer. Dehydrated vegetables were one of the first solutions people ran towards because they were easy to grow and easy to store. But even that had a lot of issues. People who had lived their entire lives in urban centers began sprawling to whatever land they could to grow crops in an attempt to boost their rations. Naturally, they had no knowledge of it, and the country wasn't really doing the best agriculturally with all of its resources focused on the war effort. Lots of crop failure was common. Despite that, some celery, carrots, and onions saved the average American household during the war a lot more than government intervention ever did. Here's what dinner looked like when your life depended on calories per ounce: the infamous meat and noodle brick. Issued as part of the C-ration, this block of compressed meat, pasta, and salt wasn't food in the traditional sense, it was survival in a box. Designed for soldiers on the move, these dehydrated rations could last through mud, rain, and shellfire, waiting for a little boiling water and a brave stomach. When rehydrated, assuming you had water, heat, and time, it transformed into a lukewarm slurry of salted beef shreds and gummy noodles. If you didn't have time, you just gnawed it dry like a protein-packed dog biscuit. It didn't taste good, but it filled you up, sort of. In the field, the goal wasn't flavor, it was fuel. And meat and noodle bricks packed enough protein and fat to keep a man marching, shooting, and hopefully making it home. soldiers joked that it tasted like compressed depression, but they ate it anyway because there wasn't anything else. These bricks weren't cooked with love, they were engineered for war. It was rare to get protein from actual meat during that period, but that didn't stop people from fulfilling their cravings by dabbling in mock cuisine, such as the popular mock fish fillet. While this did not actually use fish, it imitated the texture and flavor with pints of milk brought to boil, ground rice, chopped onion, and leeks, with the end being a good stir in a properly beaten egg. What you had was an excellent mimicry that felt close enough to the real thing while being distinct and offering a new experience. Nowadays, this recipe is used in vegan communities, but its origins come from very anti-vegan places, and it would be a great substitute for actual fish and chips as well. Meatloaf. Who doesn't love this classic comfort food? But what happens when you get a sweet craving and add a little twist to it? Well, you get meatloaf with brown sugar glaze. Meatloaf is a traditional German, Scandinavian, and Belgian dish, and it is a cousin to the meatball in Dutch cuisine. But a brown sugar glaze? That's where things got exciting. This dish was a culinary experiment of the Wei days, and it's safe to say it was a huge success. Every continent came up with their own variations of this dinner, and it became a centerpiece at every dinner table. It was basically combining ground meat, breadcrumbs, and spices, topped with a caramelized brown sugar and ketchup glaze. What could go wrong with that? Meatloaf is still a staple for most people around the world, but you don't really see it get paired with a brown sugar glaze anymore. It was just a post-war craving, I guess. During the Second World War, a lot of basic rationing food was cooked up by the government thanks to that intervention and those relief efforts that I'm talking about. One of those was vegetable bouillon cubes, and they started to become extremely common ingredients. In the United States, food shortages during wartime were such weekly occurrences that people had pretty much accepted them as a fact of everyday life. Not that getting used to it mattered much, since hunger was still bad enough of a problem for people to get out into the streets and make as much noise as they could. Bouillon cubes were convenient and efficient and were pretty much in the same vein of food as ration chocolate was. All stuff like this actually went through the Office of Price Administration, and one of the most popular items they ever gave out was these cubes. They helped make broths and added loads of flavor to soup, and the government was, of course, quick to notice the fact that people had taken to mostly soups as far as everyday meals went. They were cheap, saved lots of space, were easy to carry around and even easier to cook, and the best part was they applied to every household. It wasn't like if you didn't have an oven, you couldn't use cubes. Ever thought you would have a cassie with no meat in it? An economy loaf is just that, and we could not have named it better if you put a gun to our head. Using potatoes, peas, flour, eggs, and some basic seasoning, this was a loaf made entirely of alternatives to meat, so for vegans it is a recipe to keep in mind throughout the ages. But in the rationing-ridden times of World War II, it was a godsend to have this quick and easy loaf. It was even popular enough to be in cookbooks like The Modern Hostess, even its special patriotic edition. Roosevelt's presidency really saw some gems, right? Spam and eggs was a classic during World War II when Spam was not only dirt cheap, but also readily available everywhere. Spam's reputation as one of the heartiest, affordable, and long-lasting meat products made it a perfect fit for the tough times. Plus, its delicious taste spoke for itself. I mean, imagine a salty, processed meat block nestled next to a sunny side-up egg. It's a match made in, wartime necessity. It originated during the Great Depression era, but World War II is when it became a hit around the globe. Now let's be honest, it's not exactly gourmet. Spam continued to be popular in the post-war era and became a staple in most American households. While Spam is still around today, it's no longer the breakfast star it once was. So we've gone over the greens people eat during times like this, as well as what they substitute in the place of regular food they no longer had access to. What about the most important part of American eating? Well, naturally, you can't have a United States without protein. Canned minced meat was the general solution everybody came up with in the face of the food shortage that everybody was facing. Protein simply became a non-factor in most people's day because the best, really good, and even slightly above average cuts of meat were always rationed away by the government for the use of soldiers. That left people to start eating things like necks, feet, tongues, and other parts of animals they hadn't ever used. Things like offal eating really became popular, and one thing that really helped alleviate the shortage was canned minced meat. Canned minced meat wasn't usually pre-seasoned, though some variants did come with a lot of generous seasoning, which made it easier to keep down too. However, they were also just a bit more expensive, and people were trying their best to keep costs down on the low. Plus, loads of people had already kept a store of basic seasonings and herbs to use for situations like this. Being cost-effective was a routine for the American public by that point. Powdered egg omelets were a morning miracle and a running joke at the same time. The eggs came in olive drab tins, fine yellow powder that smelled faintly of sulfur, dust, and whatever had been stored nearby. To make them edible, you mixed the powder with water and whatever else you had. Bits of canned ham, dried onions, maybe a slice of toast if you were lucky. The result was a gooey, bright yellow mass that somehow passed for an omelet. It wasn't fluffy or flavorful, but it was hot. And when you were cold, damp, and had not slept right in 3 days, a hot meal counted for everything. Soldiers cracked jokes about it constantly, calling it spackle or egg sponge, but they still cleaned their plates. You had to eat it fast before it cooled and turned into a chewy yellow slab. Some said it tasted like regret, others like cardboard with a pinch of salt. But it filled your stomach. That mattered more than taste. The smell of powdered eggs cooking in a battered mess kit clung to tents and uniforms alike. And for all its faults, it brought men together in those early, groggy hours. They would complain, swap horror stories, and still look forward to it the next day. It was not elegant, and it was definitely not gourmet, but it reminded soldiers of home, or at least the distant memory of one. In that way, it did what it needed to do. Vienna sausages were thin, parboiled sausages traditionally made of pork and beef in a casing of sheep's intestine, then given a low-temperature smoking. These originated in Germany during the First World War and were traditionally made from cured pork. After having been brought to North America by European immigrants, Vienna sausage came to mean only smaller and much shorter smoked and canned wieners, rather than link sausage, beginning about 1903. During the post-war days, it became a famous finger food at parties and family gatherings. From hot dogs to casseroles, Vienna sausages can do it all. Just don't expect a gourmet experience. They're still available today, but they're nowhere as famous as they once were. Turnip greens were also really helpful because they meant that you could get basic things like brine and other kinds of vegetable-based dishes when you really didn't want to spend resources on anything else. Sometimes it helps to save the little bits of ham and meat, the scraps and leftovers, for when you may really end up needing it later. In times like that, it meant that people barely had anything to eat, and turnips really helped. Turnips were one of the best kinds of leafy greens for the American diet during the Second World War because you could can them, you could pickle them, you could transport them easily, and you could also bake them. If you didn't have access to any kind of oven or couldn't afford one either, then you could also make use of turnips by simply boiling them. You could serve them with mashed potatoes and honestly make a pretty decent meal out of it too. Plus, they were really popular to use during the victory gardens that had started popping up during the wartime in people's backyards. Being able to grow your own produce was a milestone achievement for the American people in times like this, and it meant that they could get a steady supply of things like turnips, at least. Dehydrated potato flakes with bacon grease might not sound like a real dish, but it was one of those battlefield creations born of desperation and a little ingenuity. The military issued powdered potato flakes for easy carb loading. They were light to carry and cooked up fast with just hot water. Alone, they tasted like wallpaper paste. But when bacon was on the breakfast menu earlier in the day, some clever soldiers saved the leftover grease in their mess kits. At dinner, they'd stir a spoonful of that precious, smoky fat into their reconstituted potatoes, and suddenly the bland mash took on a rich, salty flavor that almost passed for real comfort food. Some added crumbled crackers for texture. Others mixed in bits of powdered egg or Spam if they had any to spare. It wasn't elegant, but it was hot and filling, especially during cold nights in the field. You didn't need a stove, just a canteen of boiled water and some creativity. For soldiers stuck eating the same rations day in and day out, these little hacks brought a taste of something homemade, even when they were thousands of miles from home. Turkey tetrazzini was a mid-century Italian-American delicacy back in the day. In 1950s through the 1980s, upscale New York City restaurants, including Mama Leone's and Sardi's, featured tetrazzini on the menu. It was a creamy pasta bake made with turkey, mushrooms, and sometimes peas, all coated in a rich white sauce and baked until bubbly. This dish was named after Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini. In some variations, egg noodles were used instead. This dish was a popular way to use up leftover turkey, particularly after Thanksgiving, and it became a beloved comfort food in many American households. Today, it's less common to find it on dinner tables, but for those who remember it, turkey tetrazzini is a nostalgic reminder of family meals and holiday leftovers. Canned liver spreads were a part of the several different kinds of processed foods that those same industries I'm talking about started whipping up to help with the relief efforts. There was a massive need for food that was nutritionally sound and also really convenient. Some people think that the over-reliance on convenient food that was a last-ditch Band-Aid fix instead of actual proper channels of distribution for food that dealt with the shortages is what led to Americans and their whole deal with convenience food culture. Wartime rationing was badly handled, and that's just a historical fact. Canned foods made life easier for both soldiers and civilians in general. They were the kind of stuff that would last you months and would also be a good source of much-needed protein. People started to eat different kinds of animal meat that they never had thought of eating before, and canned liver was a part of this. While liver itself was common in some traditions and cultures, such as Native American cultures, Middle Eastern communities, and indigenous tribes across America, it had never hit the suburbs like it did during this time. Canned liver spreads meant that your average breakfast, consisting of homemade stale bread, crackers, and toast, also was just a bit more exciting than usual. Canned macaroni with meat sauce sounded like a warm, comforting meal until you opened it. Inside the drab metal can was a thick, gloppy mixture of overcooked elbow noodles floating in a reddish-orange sauce with tiny flecks of meat that looked like they had given up long before the can was sealed. Issued widely during the Korean War and into Vietnam, this meal was part of the infamous C-ration set. Troops joked it was school lunch from hell, but they ate every bite. It could be heated over a small burner, or if no time or fuel was available, eaten cold straight from the can. The texture was soft and grainy, with a faintly metallic tang from the can itself. But when you were exhausted, freezing, and 1,000 miles from any other comfort, that mushy pasta became something more. It was calories. It was warmth. It was something to hold on to. Some veterans recall it with disgust. Others, weirdly, miss it, not for the taste, but for what it meant. A hot meal in a chaotic place, a reminder that someone somewhere was still trying to keep you alive. Today, MREs are sleeker, tastier, and easier to carry. But that macaroni in a can? It was part of the experience. It was a lukewarm hug from the military-industrial complex. And it worked, more or less. Hogshead cheese is one of the more bizarre meals on the list. Okay, before you jump to any conclusions judging from the name, this meaty meal doesn't contain any cheese or any dairy products at all. This unique delicacy originated somewhere in ancient Germany and instantly made its way to other parts of Europe. So, if not cheese, what was it actually made of? It was basically flesh from the head of a pig, typically set in aspic and usually eaten cold at room temperature, or in a sandwich. This dish was popular in the post-war era as it made use of every part of the animal, reflecting a time when nothing went to waste. Many recipes use a bit of lemon juice to add a bit more flavor to the jelly. It has disappeared from our dinner tables and menus, and I don't think this one calls for a comeback. Now, this might surprise you, but powdered gelatin was genuinely also popular during the Second World War. This was essentially entirely due to the restriction on meats and fats, and how gelatin was used as a substitute in those scenarios. See, people needed fillers in their dishes badly, and gelatin just happened to be a really good one. You could also not cut too deeply into your dairy or meat reserves if you were relying on gelatin. A low-cost and stable product was perfect for the kind of life people were living during the war, and powdered gelatin was cheap too. People had also really begun relying on foraging and growing their own fruits, and a big way to make them taste and feel better as well as become heavier as a meal was to mix in gelatins and make salads out of them. Plus, fruit-flavored gelatin had also become really popular. Most families would try to make use of canned fruits too. It helped to put a bunch of really cheap and low-cost ingredients together for a fulfilling meal, rather than focusing too heavily on exhausting one ingredient and making it the centerpiece of your entire meal. Sorghum syrup had 3 great uses during the war that the United States had actively participated in. It was something the government could rely on both for the people of America and the country's soldiers, so it became a key player just off of that alone. Secondly, most areas already had a knack for sorghum, and it was the more affordable option for a lot of different regions. This was thanks to most places producing their own sorghum, and that's why the disruption in the global supply chain hadn't really affected sorghum production too badly. That's a factor that lots of people don't talk about enough, but supplies for the entire world had become low everywhere by this point. Sorghum was a great alternative to sugar, molasses, and malts, and it helped to keep some of this in store as well. Sorghum also had a bit of magnesium, but it was a really good source of iron. It was also a wonderful sweetener, and this was actually a part of an overall bigger movement. For the first time in a while, the mainstream masses were delving into the culture that was out there in America. Sorghum syrup was a niche part of American syrups, for example, but in folk traditions, it's always been wildly popular. The war was just the first time the general public explored those traditions. Which military mess hall meal would you have dreaded most? Drop your answer in the comments and share your family's military food stories. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another taste of forgotten history.